What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So this is the OPPO Find N2 Flip. I've had it for a few months now, and while I honestly haven't had too much firsthand experience with flippable, foldable phones, the N2 Flip, to me, seems to be one of the better executed ones out right now. My minimal foldable experience is really a product of my country of residence. Here in the US, our options are pretty much Samsung or Samsung. And I tried the Z Flip, but I ultimately felt there were too many compromises. Build quality and display crease, the tiny outer screen, a subpar camera setup. The N2 Flip actually addresses all of those things and more. And while it still isn't officially coming to the US, the whole rest of the world, thanks to OPPO's global launch, can consider this as a serious contender for the best flippable, foldable phone. Now, the thing about a foldable device is that all of the attention tends to be aimed at the hardware. The flexible screen, the crease, the hinge. In my experience using this phone, traveling with it, touching it, opening and closing it 1,000 times, OPPO really did a great job implementing still relatively new technology, but also ironing out some of the pain points that previous foldables might have had. When the N2 Flip is flipped shut, it's a compact half of a smartphone, 80-ish millimeters on each side, still the thickness of at least two smartphones, but very pocketable and out of the way. Flip it open, and the N2 Flip becomes essentially the same big-screened flagship phone you're probably already using. At 6.8 inches, it is big, more so tall, I guess. The 21:9 aspect ratio is a bit elongated, but that's okay. I've personally always felt that it makes more sense to have a smartphone-sized smartphone fold into something half its size, rather than a tablet-sized smartphone folding into something that's bigger than a regular smartphone. This to me is the more practical and useful form factor. Now, when you bend anything, it's going to have a crease. The N2 Flip has one. You run your fingers over the center of the display and you'll feel a sort of indentation, but it's not as deep or pronounced as what I felt on the Z Flip, for example. And visually, I never felt that it distorted what I was looking at or was otherwise distracting. It's not perfect, and I'm sure I got used to seeing the divot or whatever was there, but it truly is one of the more seamless instances of a flexible display being bent. In order to be flexible, the front display is this sort of plasticky material that feels much softer than glass for sure, and almost reminds me of the resistive touchscreens of yesteryear. That's not a huge deal though, because the viewing experience, which I'll dive to a little later, isn't compromised in any way. The only other thing that stands out up front are the bigger than average borders that surround the screen. They're actual physical, almost like bumpers that are raised, kind of like a phone case would be. And this isn't specific to the N2 Flip. All flippables and foldables have this around the front display, but if it's your first time with a device like this, it might stand out to you. The hinge on the N2 Flip, I also think, is a great implementation of something that's definitely quite challenging. The phone almost divides into three parts, a top and bottom panel that's connected by this smooth mechanism in the middle that has no gaps, no failure points, seemingly nothing that compromises the integrity of the phone. It feels solid and fluid. My only complaint is that beyond 90 degrees, the phone sometimes doesn't want to remain semi-folded. It flops open. There's no catch points, and the few instances where I needed the phone to remain at a kind of angle weren't always successful. But otherwise, the flippability of the N2 Flip is very impressive. And when it's all closed up, there's no awkward folded angle or gap between the display for debris to get stuck in. It's pretty much a perfectly folded square. Of course, the phone doesn't cease to be functional when it's folded. And in fact, the N2's outer display, like I alluded to earlier, is one of the things I liked most about it. It's actually a fairly large, nearly 3.3-inch AMOLED touch display, and you can swipe through about a half a dozen different things and even add a couple of third-party apps too. The standout feature for this display is its use as a viewfinder for the cameras. You can take selfie pics or even videos with the main rear camera setup, and you'll actually see yourself on that outer display. And this isn't some gimmick. This is a genuinely useful function that I've used myself on more than one occasion. It not only increases the usefulness of that outer display, but also allows you to take better selfie pics by ditching the often subpar front-facing selfie camera. You can also swipe through the weather, Weather, your calendar, and add apps like Spotify or WhatsApp. You'll be able to see notifications too, messages, emails, all of that at a glance. It's almost like a shrunken down lock screen basically, with nearly all the function. And this might sound kind of weird, but it almost makes me use the phone less, but in a good way. I can just glance at the outer display and keep the phone folded. I'm not as tempted to immediately unlock it and start flipping through apps. Also, you might have noticed either the 90+ degree forecast or me in the viewfinder wearing a neck fan. It's starting to get very hot in Las Vegas. And the new Ace 3 from Ranvu is definitely something I'll be using every day. The Ace 3 is an AI-powered automated cooling and heating wearable with additional health and wellness capabilities, and it is the most advanced personal neck fan available. It has 4 Ice Max engines with 7 upward and downward air ducts that blow a constant stream of cool air all around you. There's also 4 core cooling semiconductors on the sides, the part that touches your skin, and this gets cold to the touch within seconds. You'll feel comfortable even in temperatures exceeding 105 degrees, like in Las Vegas. And if you're in a cold environment, the Ace 3 does the opposite. You get a constant stream of warm air paired with a heated neckband. The Ace 3 is a full-color touchscreen built in for controlling all the heating and cooling modes. You can swipe and tap to change the temperature and fan speeds, and you can also view other wellness and health measurements too, like your heart rate, steps, and blood oxygen level, which are monitored by a set of sensors on the neckband. And one more thing, the Ace 3 is AI powered, so if it senses that you're warm or that it's a bit cold out, it can automatically start cooling you down or warming you up. You can get the Ace 3 on Amazon. It's actually discounted right now, and there's a coupon code too for $20 off. And thanks so much to Ranvu for sponsoring this video. So as a flexible, foldable, flippable phone, the Find N2 I think succeeds functionally, but how is it as a smartphone? Well, for one, it still resembles a flagship device with a polished aluminum frame, great color option too, fingerprint sensor on the side, stereo speakers. It lacks a headphone jack and expandable storage, unfortunately, but that's the story with most phones nowadays. What OPPO does give you though are all the accessories you could want in the box, including a 2-piece clear case, a 44-watt wall plug, and a really nice, very thick USB cable. Accessories included in the box. What a concept. The 6.8-inch display, like I mentioned earlier, actually is flagship caliper too, even being a flexible one. It's an LTPO AMOLED panel with HDR10 Plus support, coming in at a full HD 2520 by 1080 resolution for some 403 pixels per inch, and it's a 120 Hz high refresh rate display. So essentially no compromises whatsoever with the viewing experience, which is great. It's also very bright, 1200 nits with the user-controlled brightness, 1600 with auto brightness. It is certainly the bold, sharp, colorful, good-looking display you'd want to have on a phone like this. And like I already explained, the fact that it's a bendy boy doesn't make much of a difference. In fact, because the display is plastic, not fully glass, there isn't nearly as much glare as there normally would. So sort of an unintended benefit of the materials. The little bit of glare you do get does emphasize that bend from time to time, but again, I haven't felt that it's substantially impacted the viewing experience like some other foldables. If this were a regular display on any other smartphone, it would be great, but the fact that it's also a foldable screen makes it that much more impressive. And what you get to watch on screen visually is almost as nice as seeing it physically bend in half. Inside, OPPO actually went with sort of a unique processor to power this phone. It has the MediaTek Dimensity 9000 Plus chipset paired to either 8, 12, or even 16 gigs of RAM and 256 or 512 gigs of storage. And while those specs may not necessarily align with the familiar Snapdragon flagship phones that most people know, I found this phone's performance to be pretty close to top tier. The software experience here is ColorOS 13 over Android 13. I've actually received quite a few random software updates in the last couple of months that I've had this phone too, which is great. And while ColorOS may not be the default choice for those of us who want a seamless stock OS experience, OPPO does a fair job balancing their own Android flair with functional add-ons. The phone did ship with a lot of pre-installed stuff though, apps and games and things, some of which I got rid of, but plenty still stuck on the phone for good. So that's a bummer, but day-to-day use with this thing is really solid. And with OPPO promising 4 years of major updates and 5 years of security patches, it should stay relevant for years to come. For me though, while powerful performance is always a plus, battery life is something these flip phones often struggle with. But in the case of the N2 Flip, this phone is in it for the long haul. Inside, OPPO somehow managed to cram a 4300 mAh battery. that's somehow seamlessly all divided up inside. And paired with the 44-watt wired charging speeds that juice this phone up to 50% in a bit under 30 minutes, that means my time spent plugged in is minimal. I never had a day where this phone didn't last all the way, which is awesome. And again, that wasn't something I could say about Samsung Z Flip, for example, which had just a 3700 milliamp battery. With the N2 Flip, battery life is solid and almost a standout feature. Finally, when it comes to the cameras, besides taking fun front-facing selfies, the dual lens setup on this phone has captured some incredible shots for me. So hardware-wise, you get a 50 megapixel main shooter paired to an 8 megapixel ultra-wide. I know I crapped on the selfie camera earlier, but it's actually a 32 megapixel lens and pretty good on its own. Inside the camera app, OPPO offers enough here to fulfill even the most camera-savvy consumer, without overcompensating with useless filters and gimmicky add-ons. There's a robust manual mode, video at up to 4K 30, decent digital zoom for its lack of telephoto lens, and really great image processing on OPPO's part, considering they aren't exactly the industry leaders like Google or Apple. When you snap a pic, you'll see this phone transform the image in real time. The processing sometimes is a little slow, but the end result is a shot that I think is darn near flagship caliber when the conditions are right. I think low light and nighttime pictures are sometimes a miss. Dark areas and shadows pretty much go all black, but all the other pictures and videos I took with this phone looked great. Awesome color reproduction, punchy without being overdone, plenty of detail too. All in all, this is a great picture taker for most people's needs, and I wound up capturing some of my favorite pictures on a recent trip to Australia with this phone. While it's certainly a shame that OPPO's Find N2 Flip isn't officially available in the US, I hope it at least inspires the one US-focused smartphone company that makes foldables to implement some of the things this phone does well. Competition is good, it yields progress, and in a relatively short time, folding phones, particularly this flip phone variety, have really gotten good. And I'm jealous of everyone else in the world that gets to have this. I don't know that I'll ever have a need for a big tablet-sized foldable, but a smartphone-sized flippable, like the N2 Flip, is right up my alley. And considering the solid hardware and functional outer display, it's a flippable that checks all the right boxes. But what do you guys think of the N2 Flip? Have you converted to a foldable smartphone yourself yet? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.